Actually, I never even knew that I liked art. I wasn't one of those kids that got to draw when they were a kid, because that was indoor time and we were really outdoor kids. Uh, but when we got our television and I started watching PBS, is probably when I started really looking at the outside world and the art. And I remember getting angry that I couldn't listen to a whole opera because I got interrupted by my siblings. But art itself didn't actually affected me with the Phillips 66 Ranch, which is outside of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It's called, I forgot the name of it, but it used to be a home of the oil man that started Phillips 66, but he collected cowboy and Indian art probably 50 years before it was considered collectible. And so my introduction to art was from the Indian headdresses and the Indian clothes and their John Russell's sculptures and paintings, just because of that museum. It wasn't until I was in college that I attended my first museum, which is in Kansas City. And in Kansas City, the Museum of Art, I actually saw my first Van Gogh show. And that was interesting because literally there may have been 3 people in the museum to see it. There wasn't the lines, there wasn't the crowds. I got to go to the reception at the first night and it was crowded, but I came back some days later and walked through it. It was stunning to look at his paintings across the room and thought you were looking outdoors with his irises. And so I liked it. In college, I took one art history course and I probably should have known. I got an easy A, but it just seemed very fascinating and very interesting to me. But I didn't do anything until I was out of college. I had 2 babies and I went to an art class as my night out away from the kids. But that was it. I then worked as a physical therapist for 52 years. I finally gave up my license. I had started painting about 2002, ended up going back to work, and now coming back to painting since, 4 years. It's been 5 years now that I've been painting fairly regularly, and this last year as regularly as I can. When I started, it was the flowers, and I got tons of compliments on my flowers, even more so than my landscapes. And I did some flowers when I first moved to Indio 5 years ago, but I couldn't get into the looseness that I had with the flowers 10, 15 years ago, and kind of moved away from it. And about 3 years ago now, I started getting introduced to abstracts and how to paint them. And I'm finding them extremely challenging, particularly mentally, because it's so outside of my realm. The abstracts that I grew up with, I thought were crap. But the abstracts you're seeing today are built on those abstracts from the 1950s and the 1960s. There are some artists that were ahead of them, the ones that got into the Time magazine or Life magazine. But the newer abstracts just seem to build on layers and layers, and so you get these wonderful, wonderful colors. The abstracts, not so much yet, and I'm being very honest about that. But I think the work, when I finally redid my art room based on my current work. It's been interesting to now go into Saatchi Art or Fine Art America or some of the websites of artists I'm being introduced to, and my work's up there with them. I'm not that afraid of it anymore. I'm not afraid of going over a piece or tearing a piece apart and doing it again. Probably John Natillo first and foremost. I've done some pieces that I tried to mimic him, and I think I need to go back to that with my abstracts. And I haven't quite figured out how to do it, because his pieces with the Indian dancers is so full of movement and excitement and joy. And the colors are just, I haven't seen any of his originals yet, maybe one. But in his book, it's just wonderful the way he uses colors, and I would like to get better at that. Well, I work hard in my mind to determine composition before I start, even if it's in black and white. It tends to be in my head. That seems to help me get grounded with the abstract. I just hope it makes you happy. When I see my art up, it doesn't seem to happen when I'm doing the painting. Whether I'm doing a landscape or this ocean or the flowers, it doesn't seem to me that there is much, quote, happiness in it as I paint, because some of it is a struggle. But when I put it all up, I come away with the sense of it being very happy, and I hope it makes you happy too.